Anthropic just announced that it has launched an enterprise AI service firm. The new company is going to be a combination of Anthropic and several of the largest private equity firms on the planet, just to name a few, Blackstone's or Goldman Sachs and more. Pretty much the same day, a different roster of private equity firms did the same with OpenAI. But what drove them to make the exact same decision? Between the private equity firms and the two biggest AI labs, in total, they have committed $11 billion to the same problem, to get mid-market companies to use their AI. Because Anthropic and OpenAI managed to convince those overseeing the money to take the risk on behalf of the limited partners, which I'll explain later, and the portfolio companies in exchange for a high-margin service business that outlived the investment. The press release sell this as democratizing AI for the mid-market, of course. I read the deal documents. Turns out it isn't an AI story at all. It's about money distribution, and the people who carry the risk aren't actually at the deal table. To see who's actually benefiting and who suffer from this, we need to start with what the forward deployed engineers actually do, why the private equity firms is the channel of choice, and the devil's in the details. The forward deployed engineers, an old dog and with an even older trick. No, the idea of forward deployed engineers isn't exactly groundbreaking. Surprisingly, it's pretty much a rebrand of a solution architect or sales engineers. It's customer-facing technical support on deeply technical products, often focus more on deployment and post-sales customization. For example, a solution architect in AWS helps their assigned customers resolve technical issues and apparently, as the name implies, upsells additional AWS services, same as IBM Service Delivery or Salesforce Customer Success Architect. The forward deployed engineers only got popular because Palantir wears it, and Palantir reads as more AI than the rest names I mentioned. If you have a product that's complicated to onboard, requires a lot of detail and time to implement well, and is highly specialized, it's a common approach to have a service lead growth team in the organization, regardless how you call them. And as far as the role the forward deployed engineers goes, or if you like to call that, it's part technical support, part sales, part customer feedback capture. So a more interesting question about this topic isn't anything related to the forward deploying engineers. Instead, why did both OpenAI and Anthropic announce the news simultaneously, collaborating with private equity firms? Why private equity, short PE, a leg in the door? The first and obvious answer is, of course, that PE firms are great sales channels. Rather than having to target every single mid-market company directly, they can now rely on the PE firms, who owns tons of the high-growth portfolio companies, to introduce them, the AI companies, to the clients. You need to remember that both Anthropic and OpenAI are the new kids on the block. Given my love of the mafia movies, I want you to imagine this. The tech giants are like dealers with their own territories. For example, Microsoft owns the enterprise corridor. Excel first came out in 1985 or 80s even, and gradually Microsoft came to hold the enterprise and the old style industry by the balls. Then Gmail arrives, and a few years later, Google has the heart of startups, and so on. These guys don't need to knock on the doors anymore because the customers are so hooked, or with no better alternative, so the customers all crow back to one of them. Then Anthropic and OpenAI arrive. They invented Wheat Plus, a drug that we all feel the adrenaline when using and long for when the services are down. So to infiltrate and claim the territory, of course, they can't expect the help from the old-timers. Their only safe bet is to work with someone who isn't threatened by their presence or even welcome it. So they made a deal with the users' financiers, the PE firms. Imagine that. For a portfolio company, instead of borrowing money in order to buy their Wheat Plus, they now get straight up whenever they collateralize a part of their baby. And that's the role the private equity plays in this complex setup. They typically have significant sway over how companies operate. It's a pretty powerful relationship. The joint venture, JV. At the very top of the enterprise bracket, the implementation players are the typical big consulting firms selling transformation services. It used to be cloud, and now with AI. This new joint venture, however, is explicitly targeting the mid-market. Here's part of the announcement. This company, the joint venture basically, will serve as an accelerant in bringing AI solutions to mid-sized companies, of both portfolio companies of the investment firms and independent companies that can benefit from the platform. Basically, the targets are business that can't necessarily afford McKinsey or Accenture level fees and don't have the in-house capability to spare. That's the sweet spot to land forward deploy engineers, or as the press release so nicely put it, democratizing access to forward deployed engineers. Democratizing used to be the favorite go-to term for blockchain, now duly recycled for AI. The vendor, i.e. Anthropic and OpenAI in this case, could build a partnership via traditional structure, of course, but the joint venture has a few advantages. To start with, the private equity firms are committing up to $300 million each as a statement of intent to the market. This kind of financial backing makes it look and feel like a durable business than a typical go-to-market partnership, which tends to be a bit looser. On top of it, Anthropic stays involved in the deployment rather than relying on a third-party implementation partner, and because of it, they keep the feedback loop. What works, what doesn't, where the clients are struggling. Even if it doesn't lead directly to training, it certainly shapes the direction of the product. We call it deployment intelligence. And with this ever-evolving product, AI, the upside is obvious for them to stay involved for a longer time. So it's no longer a typical transformation engagement, which has a clear end to an ongoing relationship. Here's what press release said. Claude's capability change on a monthly or even a weekly basis, which creates a different kind of engineering challenge than traditional software deployment. The systems that companies build with AI needs to evolve as the models underneath them improve. So what this new venture really is a company that will have a long-running recurring relationship with its client. Great as this all sounds, there are serious risks that media coverage misses, of course. To see them clearly, you need to know how private equity actually works under the hood. A quick detour in private equity. Feel free to skip this section if you've sat in one of those rooms. So to start with, private equity firms are run by fund managers. Their jobs is to use that capital to buy companies and aim to sell them between 4 to 7 years later for a return. Fund managers are commonly called general partners, or GP for short. The capital they use is provided by limited partners, and we call them LP. In practice, these LPs are typically sovereign wealth fund or large family offices or high net worth individuals. And the LP pays the GP for a management fee, and if there is a profit when selling, GP also gets a portion of that too. At a high level, that's the structure of every private equity fund. The principle is the same for either a one-man band or a Goldman Sachs-owned vehicle. You might notice that when someone from a private equity talks about value creation, that's all they talk about. And a GP tends to put operational team in a company and pushes the company to aggressively optimize. The keywords are relentlessly focus on a small set of changes, a strong financial discipline, limited patience, and ruthless efficiency. If done well, the company comes out worth more, of course. Done poorly, just Google PE horror story. You will be busy for the next hour. Obviously, these PE firms don't buy just one company at a time, especially those big ones. Quite often, they run a portfolio of between 5 to 10 of those companies and even buy add-ons to integrate with them. Now, consider that the companies involved in this structure with Anthropic are among the largest on the planet. Their portfolio, of course, is huge. And this is exactly what Anthropic needs, a rotating cast of companies where they have direct access to the people pulling the strings. With the structure in mind, the cracks in this joint venture are much easier to see. There are two categories of the problem. The first one is operational, things that go wrong when forward-deployed engineers hits the reality of a mid-market company. And the second one is more structural, the conflicts that built into this joint venture. What will go sideways in practice? Operational risk number one, improving the businesses that you have zero clue about. As mentioned, the PE standard play is to land an operational team in a business that it has just purchased. Those teams already have playbooks. So like appointing a CEO or a CTO that they have worked with in the past with the experience aimed to do your magic and get X return on this business for us. I know about those because my partner is just one of those CTOs. Basically, the principle behind these playbooks relies on pattern matching. If you've done one of these in the same industry, you've learned from your mistakes and your successes. In the process, you have built up two very strong muscles, judgment and domain understanding. However, forward deployed engineers typically aren't domain or industry experts. Instead, they are AI implementation experts. So I have no doubts that they will know how to get the best out of Anthropic's product, but they won't necessarily know how to adjust the pattern for the reality of a procurement team in a small, fast-moving consumer goods business, for example, or how to roll up the shared IT needs of a group of vet clinics. And while the standard answer of every transformation project is, oh, it's fine because the knowledge will come from the domain experts within the company. However, in reality, we all know that A, the knowledge won't be documented. B, it's likely not easy to explain either. C, John, who knows everything, actually left 2 years back. This is a classic transformation consulting problem, but now with AI. And because it's with AI, its innate lack of judgment or inability to learn and contextualize within the organization is likely going to make this worse rather than better. Operational risk number 2. Data mess layers up like a mushed wedding cake. One of those defining quality of mid-market companies, particularly at the lower end, is underdeveloped internal data. Siloed needs interpretation. At best, a few dashboards and spreadsheets. At worst, you will have someone titled with CTO is still, for some reason, running queries straight on production. This is also a sign of poor data practice, such as governments to ensure data consistencies, correctness, and so on. And in most of those cases, decision-making is based on intuition and experience, and then it will justify by selected data rather than by data. For example, that data will always agree with the boss. And all of these, plus AI being non-deterministic for once, is a recipe for a perfect project disaster. My guess is that the joint venture will do a lot of data groundwork while they grab a few low-hanging fruits. This is, by the way, a classic play to show momentum with quick wins. I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but this could easily become just another tool, much like we all needed an ERP, a CRM, and HR system, or a data warehouse. We'll all now just need agenticness. And that's even before we get to the structure problem, which exists whether the AI delivers or not. Built for the house to win. Structure risks. Misalignment number 1. Whose interest does the GP actually serve? Yes, the GP has the power to deploy the funds, but the funds aren't actually theirs. The LP writes the check and GP makes the allocation. What's always held this together is fiduciary duty, the concept that the GP delivers impartial advice in the best interest of making the company more valuable. Now, hold that thought against this new structure, because what's the GP going to optimize for? The portfolio company's value or the joint venture's revenue? Because it's highly likely that the joint venture will recommend more service, more spend, and deeper engagement. The GP would benefit twice. Once from the portfolio company's improved performance, assume that it will improve, and second, from the joint venture's revenue. That said, this isn't a new concern. Some common solutions are in place, but they still haven't changed the fact that structurally, there are a serious conflict of interest. Misalignment number 2, implement once and a lifetime commitment. So if you still remember that PE holds companies for between 4 to 7 years before selling them. So what exactly happens to this deeply embedded AI when a company is sold? In the old days, it was clean. Whatever systems that they put in place stayed with the business. The new owner inherited the upside or the down and took it from there. This new model is different, however, in 2 ways. For the portfolio company, the joint venture stays embedded even after the portfolio company changed hands. So the AI implementation basically sticks around because after deeply embedded code everywhere, you aren't going to suddenly rip it off for ChatGPT. But now the joint venture stays embedded after the sale, which means whatever the new owner does, for example, operational changes or new product roadmaps, feeds right back into the ex-owner's knowledge base, gifted for free. Even mark my words here, the language around how this usage and data feedback and who gets to use the insight is going to become a new element in their due diligence. For the acquirer, before the sale, the GP is running both sides of the table. Remember, because now they can keep the AI cost artificially low, the portfolio company looks lean, the margins look clean, and the exit multipliers looks earned. However, the new buyer will likely inherit the real bill without being compensated if they aren't careful during their due diligence. And this isn't the worst yet. Misalignment number 3. A bad apple spoils the whole bunch. One bad play not only ruined a company anymore, but with this new venture, also the entire portfolio. So far, we only fucked up the LP, the portfolio company, and the future owner of this portfolio company. What about the private equity firms themselves? As mentioned, they are used to pattern match across their portfolio, and that's a strength until it becomes a single point of failure. In the old model, a private equity firm sends an operational team or CEO into one business at a time. If it went wrong, it was one out of a few hundred. This JV, however, works very differently. The whole point is a standardized AI playbook rolled out across the portfolio, i.e., the same forward deployed engineers SOP. Let's say a PE firm with 10 healthcare businesses with just one flawed AI agent handling critical trial documents, all 10 go down. And because the private equity owns the joint venture, nobody inside the portfolio companies now get to ask whether this vendor is even the right call. Not to mention, their whole portfolio stack now relies on Claude being live. Just imagine that you hire a contractor, let's say, to work on your office every day. Over the last 90 days, they failed to show up or showed up broken more than 100 times. What's worse is that your entire team was built around that contractor. So for each no-show, your whole operation freezes. Exactly the instability from Anthropic in the last 90 days, or given the model competition is so fierce, if Anthropic falls behind GPT-7 or Gemini X in capability, or the pricing power shifts, it costs the private equity in the joint venture both arms and legs to get out. So, benefits? Yes, there are benefits. After all, these are the shrewdest bunch on earth. For Anthropic and OpenAI, of course, a captive user pool. If it shows signs of life quickly, it's an IPO valuation driver. Anthropic also keeps a tight feedback loop from implementations since there are no independent implementation partners in between. That should help them improving their products. For the private equity firms, the general partners just set up a high-margin service business that will stay with their portfolio companies after they're gone, and the companies they control are the joint ventures clients. Even with some fee offsets early on, the important part is that this revenue stream likely outlived the investment. What's more important is the uncorrelated returns that don't need to be shared with the limited partners. On the other hand, the limited partner probably will also want a good deal out of this. They might get a better exit valuation, but by and large bears most of the risk of misalignment, the implementation failure, and otherwise misallocated investment decisions. The portfolio companies in the end are going through the new wave of transformation. Whether this AI transformation is successful really depends entirely on if the participants read the small print and can manage the risk accordingly. Not to mention, the moment AI is involved, risk management becomes a very different game entirely. If you like the story, please share this with your friends and watch more here.